So I got this email from Airfix, right? And it said, would you like to come and see how our kits are made? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. I mean, after all, they're made in India, right? Everyone knows that. Everything is made in India. Well, this isn't Nagpur. This is New Haven. And it's November. Find out more right here on Gary's Stuff. Hello, I'm Gary, welcome to my channel, welcome back if you've been here before. This is the first of two reports on the special day out we had, looking at the new 1/24th scale Spitfire from Airfix, how they designed it and how they made it. Now, if you like the show, I hope you do, remember, thumbs up on the button below if you would be so kind. Also, you might want to consider subscribing to the channel, hit the bell to be notified of when new videos arrive as they do. And of course, you can always support future productions through Super Thanks or any of my online partners. Anyway, before we look at the processes they use to mould the Spitfire into a thing of beauty that it is, we had a chat from the Airfix team about the design challenges and how they overcame them, and various other issues around designing the Spitfire and bringing it to production in the first place. First person to talk was Dale Luckhurst, the head of brand, and he was answering the often asked question of why supplies are so slow in arriving.
Some of you may know or seen some videos online about the production of Spitfires, and that's the catch-22 of making product in the UK. If it's made in India, we can hold containers out in India and fill as many containers as we need to and put them on a ship at the same time. So let's say 5,000. We can bring 5,000 Spitfires over in one hit the market with 5,000 Spitfires. Off you go. It's not that number. We would make way more than that. We don't have that pleasure in the UK. This is essentially their goods out space. So we can't fit 5,000 Spitfires in this space here, ship them to Canterbury, Margate, and then out to retailers. So what we had to do is phase the batch of those out to market. Obviously the product is already available on airfix.com for 5 days before it was then sent out to trade. It wasn't purposely kept back for 5 days before hitting the trade, but 5 days after we then got the next batch from the guys here, and that went out on Thursday to the first batch of trade accounts. This week, this Thursday, we should get a larger batch, and then it goes out to the next group of trade accounts. Okay, so that we're just having to manage that. It's a pain. I would much rather just hit the UK with a big lump in one hit, but it's just something that we've had to manage because we're going to make it in the UK, or we are making it in the UK rather. And what a fantastic thing, an opportunity it is to make this a beautiful kit in the UK. We ummed and ahed about it, obviously. The commercials and bits and pieces is something that we're always looking at, India versus the UK, but we just felt that this kit, being the super kit and being an icon that it is, had to be made in the UK.
Okay, let me just stop this now to unpack this a bit. Okay, so now I see this as a problem of balance that they have. Okay, so in the UK, they've got a much higher cost to producing the kit, right? They've got labour rates in the UK are much higher than in India. Of course they are. You also have, as an employer here, you have to make national insurance contributions, you have to make contributions to pension schemes. Pretty sure, I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure you don't have to do that in India. Also, your commercial premises are a lot more expensive to rent, or you have rates that you have to pay on commercial premises which are really high. Your energy bills, as we all know, are going through the roof. So the costs over here in the UK of production are very high. I mean, really high. However, if you produce in India, where the costs are much lower on a lot of these things, you then have to ship the stuff from India to the UK. Now, at the moment, a 40-foot equivalent unit, you know, the big things you normally see on trucks here, of the big containers, 40-foot equivalent containers, they carry around Now, if you stack them to the ceiling, you're going to get, what, 25 pallets, maybe 3,000, 3,500 individual kits in there. A 40-foot equivalent unit from India to Western Europe through the Suez route is around 15,000 US dollars it costs you to ship it. So each kit is already costing you $5 just in shipping, purely in lugging it across the water through the Suez Canal into Western Europe. You've probably got duties and levies and goodness knows what else in India to put it on the ship in the first place. You then have, when you get to Europe, you've got import duties and levies and taxes and associated costs just of getting it off the ship and onto a truck and up to the depot or your storage facility, which of course incidentally also costs a lot of money. So you've got quite a lot of money per kit just getting it from the factory in India to your warehouse in the UK. And on the other side of the equation, you've got the much higher costs of actually producing the thing in the UK, even though your transport costs are considerably lower. My own feeling is that it's a really close balance, and I suspect slightly to the worse in the UK. However, you also have the PR benefit of saying we are making this kit in the UK, and at some point being able to say, hey, we've made as many Spitfires in the UK as Supermarine and Vickers Armstrongs and all the other teams did during the war. So you've got that, which is beneficial to the whole brand and which might filter down to other kits and to your entire bottom line, balanced against just actually making very slightly less per kit, essentially. That's my view of it. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. My question would be, had COVID not happened, had shipping rates not trebled or more as a result of COVID, would we be having this conversation? Would this ever have been produced onshore when the balance created by the massive shipping costs, suddenly those costs are much lower and the difference is huge? Would we be doing this? Would we be in New Haven? Would we be in Nagpur or wherever it is in India? I guess we'd be in India, or at least on a Zoom call to India. Anyway, back to the presentation. How does Airfix actually even decide that this is what they're going to do? Let's have a chat with Luke Slaney-Hewitt, the researcher at Airfix, who can get us through the idea of kit selection.
Bear with me. So I'm going to go through selection criteria when we come to do a kit. So I'll go through Spitfire specifically, because it's always interesting to see how we got to doing a new 24 scale Spitfire and why a Mark 9. We have to look for gaps in the market. That's always our first criteria. What isn't there? You know, whether it's a 32nd scale Hurricane, a 24 scale Mark 9, you can't be releasing against another company. You know, the market potentially isn't big enough, depending on the subject. So you have to be looking, what can we do, and also does it in keep with what our brand identifies with? You know, release schedule. We have to get multiple boxings out of any potential kit. So, you know, Spitfire Mark 9, you can look at how that's built and make your guesses on what's coming next, maybe. We want to get 2-3 releases at least to make our money back. You know, it's nice, we have a great time designing and building these, but at the end of the day, we have to make money off them. So,
having looked at the kit of the 124th Spitfire, I think it's pretty obvious that there is plenty of scope for doing different versions of the developments of the Mark 9. You can do different wingtips. You can have extended wingtips, or you've got the clipped wingtips. You could do a Mark 12 very simply. You could actually do the Photo Reconnaissance Mark 9 very easily, because the fuselage half that's there at the moment, the access to what would normally be the battery bay, I guess, there's like an indentation on the back of the part. It really looks like in future that's going to be tooled out, and that'll be a hatch, that maybe even removable hatch, I don't know. But it looks like you could do that because the wings won't be different. The 16 Squadron aircraft carried all their weaponry anyway. So that's a possibility. Of course, that's one of the schemes that is on my list that you can choose from to make me build on my Mark 9 Spitfire. I don't think they'll go for a Griffin engine. I think that's like one step too far, but I think there could be a lot of variation on the Merlin engine theme pretty much built into this kit already. And I think it's brave of Airfix to have a flagship product and then do variations of it. I'm hoping that's because it costs them relatively a lot less to bring out the next version. Anyway, let's get back to it.
Growing ranges, as I was sort of saying, you want to make sure that you're in keeping with what your brand is known for. So, I put the Vampire up there, Cold War jets. People build collections, people build specific eras of aircraft. You want to make sure you're sort of not just doing a one-off product, and that's the only thing from that era, from that sort of aircraft type. You want to be making sure people can build multiple of various kits. There are, of course, rule breakers. I'm talking about all these rules we have, and then there are rule breakers. They're things that you go, we'll do it anyway. It doesn't make sense. Normally they are gaps in the market, so you can get away with saying that. There's none out there. There's probably a reason there's none out there, but sometimes you think you can get away with it. So, the Swift is an example. There was no subsequent release because you can't do anything after FR5. So, you do a unique aircraft and it will sell because it's unique, but you can't get a second or a third, and maybe it doesn't fit into a range, but you want to do it anyway. And then previous sales, I put a Spitfire up there. Airfix Spitfire seem to go together. You look at aircraft, are they famous aircraft? Spitfire's obviously being an example of that. Have we sold lots of them before? You know that if you've sold lots before, you're probably going to sell lots again. So we have to look at all these sorts of things as we're going through product development.
Now, of course, if we do take a look at these criteria, then there's a couple of things that really start screaming out at us. And Airfix, you know what they are. Let's think about the handy page Halifax. Gap in the market, tick. No one else is making one right now. Get in there before Italeri come to the same conclusion. Release schedules, lots of different marks with different engines, fin designs, turret layouts, lots and lots of varieties of marking options. If you're looking at a growing range, it exists. British World War II bombers, just the Halifax, Hampden and Stirling are missing. Italeri have already nailed the Stirling very recently, and the Hampden doesn't meet the future potential criteria. However, it's a rule breaker, so that's where the Hampden goes, of course. Previous sales and notoriety, just look at the traffic on auction sites in the old Halifax kit that is terrible by modern standards. So please, Airfix, by your own criteria, the Halifax is a shoo-in. You'll sell every one that you make. Hampden, lovely idea to do that as one of the off-the-wall kits as well, but Halifax, you've got 3-4 boxings of that already nailed in. Very straightforward. Okay, rant over. Sorry, but rant over. Back to Luke now and see what else he's got to say.
So this is my life, my bread and butter, and it sort of takes you through what we do. So we've decided on the product, Spitfire Mark 9. What do I go and do? I have to locate experts. So I have to find people that know their stuff, not just think they know their stuff on Brick Modeler, actually know their stuff.
It's all good on YouTube today.
Yeah. I have to find people that know their stuff, and there are plenty of them on forums, but there are a lot more that think they know their stuff. So you really have to dig into their knowledge and find out, why do you know so much? Where does this passion come from? You don't want to be going off false information because it can really muck you up later down the line. And obviously, you have to find archived material. This is very similar to when you're starting a build of any sort. You want to be building your reference library, finding any original drawings, maybe not so much if you're doing a build, but from my side, finding original drawings is the holy grail. Also, building that subject library, looking on Scalemates and stuff, finding books on the subject and getting everything you can. You need to build that wide subject library because quite often you'll find books contradict each other because they've all been written by different people, edited by different people, and they all say different things. You'll quite often find there's a lot of contradictory evidence in these books. So you want to get as wide a reference as you can and narrow it down. It makes you question why things are being said in books and why that person's made a mistake, and hopefully gets you a more accurate model. Version selection, as I was saying, you want a release schedule. So you want to be able to say, right, we'll release the Mark 9, then we'll do the, I'm not going to say what's coming next on close. Okay, so then the Mark 8, let's say, you can look at the tail wheel doing a separate insert. Same for any product, you want to make sure you're picking the right versions and you can stay accurate to the true, the base kit whilst adding extra bits to release another version. You also want to look at how easy it is for Chris to design. There are certain points where you can go, actually that's too far, you're stretching the tooling, it's going to make life really difficult for all of us, so maybe don't do that version. And then design team briefing. this is all good and well, it's in my head and it's maybe on the computer somewhere, but I then need to put it down and tell Chris, right, we're going to do this, and then we go through it as a team. You know, you want to involve as many people as you can in this process to make sure you're not making any stupid mistakes, and also critiquing each other as you go through to make sure that you're getting the best design at the end of the day, essentially. And then we do project critiques. So Chris will spend ages going through it, and he loves me when I come to him with a presentation of 100 notes saying, that's rubbish, change that, change that. No, he hates me. I think some days he goes home swearing. But there's always things you miss when you're designing, or things that are quite easy to overlook, especially on my part as well. So you want to get as many people as involved in critiquing, and it can be a brutal process. Scheme selection, I put it there, but it shouldn't always be at the end there. You should hopefully be doing towards the start. You've found your versions that you want to do. You want to look at what aircraft you want to represent, so you can design to those parts. So you don't want to get to the end and go, this scheme is fantastic. Too bad we haven't done that aerial, we haven't done that rudder, or you want to make sure you're doing that early on in the process so that you've got all the relevant bits and you've got selections when you come later on.
So we can see why this process takes so long. I mean, it's probably about 2 years from start to finish with a super kit like this. It's not that straightforward. It takes a long time from, hey, why don't we make this, to it actually appearing on the shelves.
So I'll start off by focusing on Spitfire a bit more. Research process, as I say, finding archive material. Spitfire is quite interesting in that it's a very famous aircraft, as we all know, and there's a lot of drawings out there. Quite often we'll find that drawings can be a bit overwhelming. Say you've got 15,000 drawings, that's a lot of man hours to sort through every nut, rivet and bolt. We don't need to go to that level of detail all the time. We're looking for stuff like sub-assemblies, GAs, part drawings at times, but not always. It can be too much. So you want to combine this with various other things, such as photos of the real thing. Looking at a 2D representation can really get you quite confused. We have this thing where you're looking at a 3D thing on the screen and it's way bigger on the screen than it is in real life. You need perspective, so you need to go out and see the real thing in real life, appreciate the sort of subtleties of the design. So we'll go out and visit various things. Try and visit as many aircraft as you can, especially with Spitfires, because they're all different.
I mean, this is a very good point, actually, with the passing of the years. How many Spitfires out there, especially ones that are flying, are actually all that original and all that accurately original? I mean, you've got new navigation and radio equipment. You've got all sorts of different regulations that have come in. It's a civilian aircraft, not a military one, so you really have to pay a lot of attention to regulations these days. There's all sorts of new manufacturing techniques. Parts are made better now than they ever could be then, so you replace them with a newer, safer part maybe. The kit, however, has to be entirely period accurate.
As I was saying, original photos are amazing for us. One of the best places to start off, especially if you're in the cockpit, is pilot's notes, looking at various parts in there. Again, checking revisions, making sure they're not post-war, making sure that they're as original as they can be. And then we get to the critiques, the bit where Chris goes home crying, hopefully not, where he spent many a month designing a new Spitfire, and then we go in and tear it to shreds. So looking at various bits, stuff that's so easy to get wrong. So the air tanks, where you're referring to a photo that's in a book and it claims to be original, but you design the NATO air tanks, we have to go back and say no, change those aren't wartime, and various things like that, adding aerials. Mirroring, that's one of the bugbears, where you've got rivets on one side that aren't the same on the other. Designers normally start with one half of the aircraft and swap it over. Aircraft aren't like that in real life, so you quite often find rivets that aren't shared. So you see at the top left there, where the gun bay rivets are slightly different. So all sorts of issues like that. That's a selection of 3. Then we get to the design stage. So this is where we need to put it all down on a presentation, on paper, and give it to Chris and say, right, watch out for these bits. You want to be doing this and these versions. So you want to be identifying what option parts Chris needs to do, because it's very easy to design a Mark 9 Spitfire. I say very easy, probably a bit difficult, don't know, I haven't asked him. And then you want to make sure you're doing the right bits to allow further schemes, as I was sort of mentioning earlier. You want to do stuff like the broad cord, the various gun breech blisters, stuff like that. So stuff that might be you could miss, or if you're designing to a cost, you could crop out. So you want to be identified.
Okay, so we've got everything planned out. All we need now is a little bit of product design and happy days, isn't it? Okay, well maybe it's not quite as simple as that, and designer Chris Parker-Joy will tell us more.
I'm going to start off with this slide again, because as you said, this is the most exciting thing in Airfix designer's life, is when we come across an offset table. It might look incredibly boring, but it is the confidence that you have got all of the shape laid out there from the original designers. And when I first came across one of these, I had no idea how to read it, and thankfully one of the other designers sat down with me and helped me understand between these water lines, and as you're working up, and sort of every line that way and every line this way, there's numbers plotted, and you can almost see it's kind of upside down, but from the tail coming down as it comes back up just behind the canopy, and then it drops back down from the canopy forwards for the engine. That kind of shape, slightly inverted, upside down in those numbers as it's and you can plot it out, and it's like an adult's version of dot to dot. So that really enjoyable game as a kid, I get to do it at the beginning of a project. Just plot out all these numbers on flat sections like this, and as you go from each station, maybe working from the front to the back, plot out, and you begin to see the shape appearing as you go along. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's very satisfying. Relatively, there are different versions of how you can build stuff in CAD, different software packages, but for us, we use something called parametric, which is you start with very simple shapes and you build your way up. There's maybe for TV and film industry where you want to make something quicker, it's more like molding, imagine using clay, you sort of freeform, you poke and push. Quicker way to do stuff, but it isn't as accurate. So we use parametric more for engineering kind of sides of things, and you're working very simple layers upwards. So down here is my Excel spreadsheet of all those numbers we saw in the offset table, where I've had to convert them from inches to millimeters, and then from full scale down to 24 scale. So rather than me doing for each one of those, create a little spreadsheet. Love spreadsheets. So you start off with something like this, and then you can create, blend these individual sections together, and you start to make surfaces like that. So this is where we'll start on any design. Just the basic shape, and you think, oh, thankfully that looks something like a Spitfire. I'm probably going along the right lines. And then from there, almost immediately, you start looking at the finer details. You think, surely there's some way before you're looking at panel lines. But for us, we're looking at things like panel lines to figure out how shall we split up this basic shape. You want to try and, as much as possible, hide where those splits are. You want to reduce the amount of filling and filing the final builder is going to have to do. So we'll look at these drawings, try to see where all the panel lines are, and we will fill our what we call a skeleton model, maybe like a base model, with just sections and cross planes, which are where we will split it up later. So you can see we've got already starting to work out the cockpit, where the seat sits, where maybe the oxygen tanks are, where there's a sort of column down the middle is just for the a light that sits underneath. And you start building it up little bit by bit. So what I'm showing here is how we go from that base model to the finished part. Is just a sequence of small changes, little bit at a time, not trying to jump to the end, because that would be far too complicated. So you'll start with the base model, and then you can see a couple of planes there, that like bulkhead, like this bit of data there, there's another little bit of data there, and from those I'll take it into a separate part, a different file, and start cutting that up based on these extra little bits of data. So it's now its individual part, but I know that where it's splits are going to be referenced to the other part, if that makes sense. I then make it a solid part, so here the computer just sees it as it has no density at all. So we need to give it some density, make it solid. And that's also a point that you'll find out if there are any holes and issues and weird bits of anomalies that the computer is not wanting to handle. I need to go and fix that. Then we'll refine it a little bit more, cut out anything else that we need to cut out. As you see a space for the exhausts. Then we'll add some of the more major detail. So here you've got the Zeus fasteners that are hanging around the outside of this piece of cowling. Are different, obviously totally different shape to the rest of the rivets, and we want to try and show that. So we'll be measuring what's the diameter of a Zeus fastener on this, and match that in the scale as we can for 24th, but Can't really so much in the smaller scales. And then here you can see there's loads of columns are just all the rivets. So I've started to plot those out. So that will create a sketch. And there is a mixture of, we can pattern some of it, but also some of it we're just having to plot them each individually, depending on how it's lined up. So we'll have if we go back to this one, thankfully for this particular project, we had a lot of nice drawings of where all these rivets are. And so we'll use this as a starting point. We will also look at photos to see how accurate this is. But we are trying to get every rivet on there in this scale. It wouldn't be so much for 48th or 72nd, just for constraints. But 24th, we have the option to try and do it. So we start to put those rivets on, as you can see up in the top corner. And then there's a few more bits of detail, maybe some hatches that maybe I missed out, I need to go back and add those. And then we can see how it fits in to the final model.
I let that run for a little while without any editing because I think it's a fascinating process. And it shows you, you get the exterior design, but that's just like, it's just a surface. It's not even a thickness of a surface, it's just a surface. You then have to work on the shape and give it thickness, which then brings its own problems, and then chop it up into parts that you're eventually going to manufacture. You don't just get an overall design, chuck a load of the rivets on it, and then chop it up. It's so much more complicated than that. And when you think this is like 460 odd pieces, that's an awful lot of work.
Once we've got that part, and to be honest, all the way through the process, but we're having to check, is this going to be mouldable? It coming out of the mould is essential. So are we able, is it going to work? Is all the draft lines, like is everything on one side like only facing that way, or is there any undercuts, anything that's overhanging? And thankfully the software can give us some analysis of that. So we can tweak those draft planes as well, move them a little bit. Maybe this curved piece, if we tilted the draft plane by 10 degrees, maybe now it will be mouldable in one piece. We're also looking at thickness, because as you're filling these cavities with plastic, if there's a really thick bit, that will cool down slower than the thin bit, and you might end up with sink, or the thin bit might struggle to fill.
I was told about at the factory about one part, I think it's E6, it's a bit at the back of the mount for the battery, and it's like a plate about this long, and there's like 3 holes in it, but the holes don't go all the way through, they're just sort of filled in. But it's a very thin piece, and so to get them filling in, they actually just reduce the closure pressure on the mould enough so it just fills it in. Essentially, it's flash. What you and I would normally look at on a mould and say, oh, it's flash because it's in the wrong place. In the right place, it's an incredibly thin layer of polystyrene that just fills in the holes, but still has the holes there, which is what it should be. It's like, holes in a beam, and it's got a little skin on it on top. Absolutely brilliant piece of engineering. Superb piece of product engineering.
Luke was saying we can sometimes get too distracted by how much I can zoom into this in the CAD and figure out, oh, that looks massive, but actually in real life it's minuscule. And so we, a few years ago, CAD'd up a Bic biro, which we can put into the assembly. So when we scale out, it gives you, your brain just immediately understands how big that thing is in real life, and it's surprisingly useful. Obviously, we can look at it, we can actually take the dimensions, and I would know technically, but having a Bic biro in there helps my brain really understand the scale. A little detail, one of the other designers thought that might be useful, and it is brilliant. I haven't shown it in these pictures because it might be weird having a Bic biro in the background, but almost all the way through, that is there in my assemblies. So I always have an idea of how big that is.
So I guess we're going to look out for an Airfix branded ballpoint pen sometime in the future. Hey, they've already got the CAD for it, so yeah, just make it and market it. People will buy it. But what about taking these designs, then actually turning them into something that you can actually physically produce? What do you do then?
So there's a picture of the tool layout, and you can see all the, laser again. The ejector pins, these little marks where they're going to hopefully push the part off. The feed gates coming in. Yes, and the screw runner all the way around. You can see some slides. So for this cowling part, I did use slides because I didn't want to have big joins that you'd have to glue together at the end on such a visible part. So we did use a couple of slides to get the details on here, and here you can see that in the plan. And I create a big spreadsheet, another spreadsheet, splitting up all these parts, where I'm trying to figure out how are you going to assemble them, what sequence is that going to be. I think I probably had about 7 or 8 versions of this tool plan by the time we got to the end of like, no, that's the order that we should put them in, this is the part, the frames they should go in. That bit of process. Actually, something you'll see today, you'll go see some of the molds, but we get some photos from the production in China as the molds are being created. You can see a little bit simpler here with, actually that's the inner bit, this is the cavity, but here you can see some of the details of the bit of copper that's going to spark erode the detail in onto the metal. It's quite nice to see these processes come along. The first set of photos we get from them is just big blocks of metal. Right, great, that means nothing to me. But a few weeks down the line we see some holes cut out of it, and it's a little bit more enjoyable. I didn't realise I had these slides, literally just told you about all of this. You can see these test shots of us building up, we'll find those little issues, go back and forth, trying to refine it. Take off some material where we need to, so this bit was a little bit tight, so I wanted to remove some material from here, so hopefully get it fitting better. So for that I will take a little measurement of it, I'll scrape some material away, measure it again, does it fit better, scrape some material away, okay, this bit feels nice, I think they need to remove 0.25mm from here, so go ahead and do that. It was a thoroughly enjoyable thing in the end to do. There was definitely points where I lost enthusiasm. I hope that's not too bad to say, but if you're doing it for a year and you're putting on all these little rivets and like, it's a pain, but it's a thing of love. At the end of it, you get to it, you're like, actually that was well worth all the time and effort.
So that's all the design dealt with now. We've gone from the original drawings and tables of numbers, and we've gone all the way up to something that we're ready to push out to the suppliers. But first of all, before we do that, we need the decal sheets sorted out, and to do that we need to research the schemes, and it's back to Luke to do that for us.
I'm back. So just going to talk you through some schemes that are included in the boxing. So we've got 5. I'll talk you through a bit of the history and why we decided to choose them. Skip on there. The A scheme, as you've got on this big poster here, is actually representing the aircraft in 3 periods of time, which is quite unique. Don't think we've done that before. So the one on the box front is June 1944. It's still part of 126 Squadron. But in July, Johnny Plagis took over the squadron and it became his mount. So we've shown it in July markings where it went to the half stripes, as you see at the top there. And then also December 1944, where it was part of a photo shoot, which is the most famous image of the aircraft, where Johnny Plagis is sort of looking behind and you see the markings just below his cockpit. So quite unique, and that image in the top right there is during December 1944, when the photo shoot was taking place. Interestingly, the aircraft was actually non-operational at the time. It had an accident at the hands of another pilot, and was just there as a bit of a showpiece, along with the other of the squadron. So I was saying there's no true British aircraft in this, which you might think strange with Spitfire, but British squadron, Gulf of Persia 126, so all the aircraft were named after states or cities in that region, and it was flown by a Greek Rhodesian fighter race, so quite nice, showing the multinational aspects of the war effort. The B and C schemes, so originally we only had 4 schemes, and I think if you've got that little booklet thing, you actually only see 4 schemes. EM398 we've shown twice, which might be a bit strange. So originally we just did the B scheme, which is Ian Kelty's aircraft, but it was later taken over by Johnny Johnson, obviously probably the most famous Spitfire 9 pilot that you'll find. So we thought we'd go the other route, and essentially said, right, everyone's going to do Johnny Johnson, we'll let other people do that, we'll do something that's not been shown before. obviously talking about the history of the Spitfire with Airfix, the first Mark 9 was in Johnny Johnson's colours. So we thought we'll do Ian Kelty's one, and then later on we went, whoa, it doesn't feel right not to do Johnny Johnson's. Let's add it in anyway. So a bit of a last minute decision, but we went, right, screw it, let's do it. So obviously variations in what we've got. We've got the photos of the actual aircraft down there. Variations in the parts. I was talking to Stu, you know, about covered wheels essentially. You know, it's what we had to include covered wheels because we've got this EM398 image here. People go, I want to build it as per that image. So this is the sort of stuff we have to look at with option parts. We obviously, the big debate is the colour of the maple leaf. So we've included both. We're not going to argue that side. Make your own decision. So it could either be green or red. I believe Johnny Johnson thought it was green, but with anyone's recollection, I can't remember what I had for dinner last night. You know, so you're asking a fighter race, what was the colour of the leaf? You know, he had more important issues at the time, I think. So we had those two schemes. We also had the B scheme, the American, as I was saying, trying to show this multinational war effort, something a bit different. There is a bit of debate about the colour scheme on this, whether it was in desert or temperate scheme at the time. Obviously, black and white images, quite hard to tell. So we've put a little note in the layouts to say, you know, believe us if you want to, but if you really disagree, it was in temperate scheme, so you can make your own decision if you're looking at reference images. They were repainted at different times, and everyone had slightly different variations on it. As I say, there was more pressing issues at the time, rather than taking colour photos and logging what the colours were of your certain aircraft. So, bit of controversy about it, but it's a lovely scheme. It's from 1944. They were based in Italy at the time, I believe. Didn't say that. Oh yeah. So, lovely scheme, showing something that's a bit different. You know, not the channel front that we normally associate with Spitfires. And my personal favourite, because I picked all these, so they're all my favourites. The French scheme, something that's really not been kitted before as far as I've seen. We always look at trying to include as many parts from the kit into the schemes. So the only thing that I don't think we have is the broad chord rudder, but in this case we wanted a clipped wing variant within the boxed schemes, which the French does for us. And it's also very, very colourful, which is a lovely thing to have. Something totally different to the green and grey that you're used to seeing. And yeah, it's quite a stunner, really. Don't think Harrington had a favourite, but I'm going to say that was his.
So that's great stuff from Luke. Now, I've got 4 choices of schemes for my kit, 2 from the box, 2 from the aftermarket. So I've got the Johnny Johnson and the French scheme from the box, a photo reconnaissance pink, and a Polish squadron in North African colours as well. Those are the 4 options I've chosen to go for, and I'm letting my viewers vote on that. Now, it will close the vote on the 27th of November, the end of 27th of November, which is a Sunday. If you're watching before then, you can still go to my community tab on my channel and vote yourself for which of the 4 schemes you want me to make, and whichever one gets the highest number of votes, either on my community tab or on my SurveyMonkey survey, then that's the one I'll make. If you want more details, there's a video specifically about making that choice already available. Now, that's how Airfix get the whole thing to the stage where we're ready to melt some plastic and inject it. And that is the subject of the next video, which will be coming out very soon, and you'll know it's be coming out when you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because you'll be notified when any of my new videos appear. And of course, if you like anything you see on any of my channels, please remember give it the imperial thumbs up on the like button below, because it helps YouTube realise that you actually like what I'm doing. In any case, thank you very much for coming along on this journey so far, and I will see you next time. Take very good care and see you soon. Goodbye.